Hello and welcome to YesterYear's Mac Games, where today we're looking at a particularly strong Galaxian-inspired space shooter titled Bedlam II. This is from Ground Zero Software, specifically Jeff Hester, and it's not the first one of his games I've covered. I did Temple Tantrum a couple of years back too. Despite taking me longer to get around to, Bedlam II is the game I've played more of, because it worked on System 7. Specs are fairly modest, a 640x480 colour monitor, PowerPC processor, 7 megs of RAM, and QuickTime 2.5. Those with something older in monochrome, however, aren't completely left out. I'm sure it'll come as a surprise to no one to hear that Bedlam II was a sequel to plain old Bedlam. Jeff made this a number of years earlier on a Macintosh SE, so I would wager that despite having a release date of '94, which is quite late for a black and white game, it should run perfectly fine on one of those, maybe older. It struck me during a quick play of the predecessor just how many of Bedlam II's game mechanics and small touches were already in place here. I am, however, not here to talk about the first one, so I'll just summarise by saying that if you have a compact Mac, get this on it. It's been sorely overlooked. Bedlam II lives up to its name. It's noisy, chaotic, unpredictable, and occasionally a bit goofy. A play area is typically awash with heaps of hostile projectiles, alien ships buzzing around in wonky directions, and power-ups going the wrong way. Sprites are imaginative, the music is a good fit, and it's all too common to lose a life without any warning whatsoever. It's the Mac Galaxian-like equivalent of the kid sat at the back of the classroom, pinging bits of rubber at the other students with a ruler, and makes Swoop look like the well-behaved SWAT paying attention at the front. The premise is that aliens have invaded the solar system. It's their second attempt, and they don't appear to have had much of a discussion over what they could have done differently to improve their chances of success, as they continue to engage the player's ship in 4 waves with a mothership tacked onto the end. Okay, so that's not entirely true. Jeff did mention that the AI was a little better and would offer players more of a challenge over the first instalment. I think it's probably quite easy to bounce off Bedlam II, courtesy of its rather steep learning curve. As a youngster, I wasn't particularly good at the game and never progressed past Neptune. It's understandable why. The play area is quite disorientating until one has gotten used to things. There are no neat, tidy squadrons of ships whizzing around in formation. It's every craft for themselves in whatever direction they happen to feel like at any given time. Also in the mix are difficult to destroy asteroids, some of which travel in reverse from the bottom to the top, which can result in an unexpected instant death should one neglect to keep tabs on them. There's no few seconds of invincibility for emerging ships either, which is particularly irksome if the mouse is being used to control the ship and one forgets where it's positioned at the start of the wave. There isn't enough time to correct the craft's direction before all the projectiles have started raining down. This lost me a lot of lives. So progress will be limited while players gradually feel their way around what not to do. But that's okay. I'm saying it has a learning curve, as opposed to the game is difficult, because while my initial couple of attempts had me experiencing frustration at everything that I described, I eventually got used to it, figured out how to mitigate it, and made some decent progress as a result. It's best to go into a game accepting that some lives will be lost for reasons beyond one's control. Here's an example. There is sometimes no way to avoid a low-swooping kamikaze craft. Playing the game well and maximising opportunities to score big points is key to offsetting this, as a new life will come along for every 20,000 scored. A good way to do this is to trigger the temporary multiplier with the mode, which is an interesting mechanic where sacrificing a life in a hostile craft's abduction beam like this results in the craft that destroys you dropping a very valuable power-up that will double the shots fired, and essentially give the life back by offering a hit point. It's best not to shoot at all while this is floating around, just in case a badly aimed projectile accidentally blows it up. The game has power-ups which are equally destructible. Shoot a supply crate to reveal the goodie inside, and shoot it again for 100 commiseratory points. At a guess, I reckon I inadvertently combusted 2/3 of all power-ups, particularly those floating up the screen rather than down. Moreover, the items that I did pick up were seldom put to any use. Shields are kinda handy, particularly against the motherships, but I feel the game really could have done with offering the player at least a small amount without having to collect it, so as to avoid some of the impossible situations. Penetrators are probably the least beneficial. One single shot destroys everything in their path, which would be handy at the start of a level when there's lots to destroy, but it's so difficult to position oneself to pick anything up at this point of the stage that opportunities to cut through the middle of the hostile ranks are fleeting, and collected power-ups don't carry over to the next stage. I did, however, take out a mothership with them once. Rockets are far more fruitful, with multiple shots allowed which all deal splash damage, and mines are probably the most useful, as aiming is optional. They float around in pretty good numbers until they hit something. Most of the enemies then will be taken out with the standard gun. A level takes a couple of minutes, and despite essentially being the same thing every round, it doesn't feel samey. This is down to each wave in a set of 4 having its own graphics and music, so players don't really see or hear too much of the same thing. Most, if not all of the ship designs are adaptations of the ones from the first Bedlam, with all of these belligerents being fairly diverse and chock full of motion. Motherships seem to do largely the same thing. They bounce around, monsoon projectiles, and switch their shields on and off. The latter is at least done in different ways, so it's kind of neat to see what the next one will look like. I particularly like the Borg Cube. The game is full of all sorts of sound, some of which can be heard in other Mac titles. The music is a good fit for the action, although after hearing it on its own, after extracting it from the game for this video, I realised it is perhaps not as succinct as I first thought. I noticed a few revisions to the music in later versions of the game too, so that does seem to have filed down some of the rough edges. The other significant ingredient in the audio department is what I'll assume is the ship's computer, which announces various bits and pieces in what is to my English ears a fairly heavy accent.
Traveling to Uranus.
I managed to get myself to the mothership at Jupiter, and was quite pleased with that. It was fun to watch the player's ship fill up with more and more doodads between each set of levels, with this sequence offering a nice breather between the action. There's a bit of blurb to read about each planet too, which is nice. All the small details like this add up, with the game's overall presentation feeling quite polished. Despite only progressing through half of the available stages, I don't think it matters. It took me about 35 minutes to get as far as I did, and by the time it was over, I'd had my fill. My best score then was 395,125, so that's your target. There really isn't any fundamental shortcomings with the game. I feel like it's built upon the base Galaxian experience as far as it needs to go. To get more complex gameplay would probably mean turning it into more of an on-rails space shooter with long levels. I would rank Bedlam II as one of the Mac's best shareware titles for this genre, and it was clearly successful enough to enjoy a fairly long life. While its base requirement was any PowerPC equipped Mac, it was eventually carbonised, allowing it to run natively on System 10. Being PPC code, however, means that it's not going to work on modern Macs. Jeff still programs, occasionally releasing a game as 5 Fans, which is a website that, with a bit of browsing, also hosts the old Ground Zero pages. Bedlam II then can still be downloaded from here, as well as the usual abandonware sites. Other videos that I've seen uploaded suggest that the emulators don't handle it all that well, so original hardware is probably the best bet for playing it properly. So, if you have the means, then do give Bedlam II a shot. It'll take a few tries to get up to speed, but once there, it really does offer a great deal of fun. That'll do it then for this edition of YYsMG. For more content on Macintosh shareware, including one of Ground Zero's other titles, Tantrum, I mentioned it earlier, check out the rest of my channel. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and see you next time.
Hi.